we are going to be starting our unit for Of Mice and Men. This is one of my favorite books that we're going to do this year, and I like to pair books and movies together, so we will be watching Of Mice and Men, which is a great, great movie, and I think that you guys will really like it. So that'll be your kind of reward for sticking it out and reading at the end. But how you get to the unit itself, you guys aren't going to be able to see most of these folders. This is just for my view, but if you click on the Of Mice and Men unit, you'll see all of the materials that I have outlined for you to use Of Mice and Men. So the very first assignment that we're going to do for Of Mice and Men is this author grid research. So it's just a little worksheet. It's going to ask you to research about the author of Mice and Men, and his name is John Steinbeck. And I won't spoil too much of that research for you, but he's one of my absolute favorite authors ever. And there will be a video here for you to help you kind of get through the process of doing this assignment. But for now, all I want to do is just kind of introduce you to Of Mice and Men and give you some historical context for the story itself. So before we get started, I just want to give you some information so that you can kind of get your brain and pull it out of your head and throw it back in time, so that you're just kind of aware of the kind of world that Steinbeck is writing about. So a couple really important things here that you're going to need is the very first thing that we're going to do is this author grid research, which we'll get into later when it's due. And then right here is the ebook. So this is where you're going to go to do the reading assignments. And then this is the audio book. So if you are a person who likes to listen to the book while you read along with it, you can click here on this folder, and here are all the chapters of the audio book for you. So when you click on them, it's going to take you to another website, and it's going to spin and load and do all of those things. But eventually, it'll come up with this little thing. You click play on it,
Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck.
There you go.
Read by
Now, the guy who's reading this, his name is Gary Sinise, and you might know him as Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump. But he also plays George in the movie of Mice and Men. So he's going to be reading the book to you, and he does a really great job with it. So again, if you want the audiobook, that's where you find it. And for the readings, we're going to click on this ebook here. And it's going to load. Okay, so here is our text, and this is what we're going to be using to read through Of Mice and Men. It's a quick read. I know it says 107 pages up here, but there's not much on a page. So only 3 paragraphs on that page. Not too bad, right? And there's 6 chapters altogether. So this is how we're going to be reading this. And you have the options here in this reader app to zoom out if it's too big, zoom in if it's too small, right? You can fit it to the width or fit it to the height, right? So I'm going to choose fit it to the width here, or you can even make it full screen if you want to. And then, that way you don't have to deal with any distractions or anything. Okay. But so this is where we're going to be reading this from. And so now to just kind of give you some of that background information that I think you'll need. So Of Mice and Men is set in the United States in the early 1900s. And it is set during a major event in U.S. history called the Dust Bowl. So what happened was the farmers and stuff, they started to be able to do more and more land, right? So if you were a farmer before this time period, you had to physically and manually plow, or you used animals to plow your ground. Well, farmers started to get access to greater and greater machinery, and they could plow more and more land. And one of the ways that you can make more money if you're a farmer is to farm more space. So people wanted to farm more ground, and so they plowed more ground. And what ended up happening was they destroyed all of the vegetation that would normally keep all of the dirt and everything in place. And it led to these conditions where the ground got really dry and really sandy. And then there was a historic drought that happened. So there was no rain for a long time. And you had all those things kind of working together to make the conditions right for these gigantic dust storms, huge hurricane-sized dust storms. And when they came through an area, they would be so bad that farmers wrote in their diaries like they had to tie a rope off to themselves before they went outside to milk the cows, because if they got too far away from their house, they wouldn't be able to see how to get back, and they might get lost in the dust storm. That's how it would come in, and it would just black out the sun. You couldn't see anything. And it would push the dust and stuff up against the houses to the point where it would bury them. And what ended up happening was the farmers in these conditions, they couldn't grow any crops. And because they couldn't grow any crops, they couldn't make any money. And so what happened was you had that occur right along another event in U.S. history called the Great Depression. So the Great Depression was a time period where unemployment in this country was great. It was so great that people had protests about not being able to find a job. Okay. And children were starving and people were going hungry, and they had to wait in line at soup kitchens just to get food to eat. And what ended up happening was a lot of those people who owned farms during the Dust Bowl, if they owned a farm during the Dust Bowl, then they couldn't continue to support that farm. So they had to leave it because sometimes the dust would be so bad that it would make the kids sick or make the adults sick. People died as a result of those dust storms. So, this picture here shows a really good example of a migrant family. So they left their farm, and, this lady's got these two kids, and, just that look on her face kind of says it all. So they traveled around to different farms. They migrated, and that's why they're called migrant workers. And they, if they were single men without families, a lot of the times they would end up living in these bunkhouses on these farms and making hardly any money at all. And they would work there for a little while, and they'd make a little bit of money, and then they would, quit and then go off. Or sometimes they just disappeared in the middle of the night, and they would go off and work at a different farm for a while, and they just kind of repeated that. So they didn't really have the opportunity to put down any roots or, do things that we would traditionally consider family things, like getting married or owning a home or anything like that. It just wasn't available to these migrant workers. And so you have this situation in which you have all of these men that are just floating around homeless, working on these farms for very, very little money, in some cases just for food or shelter or water, and working in bad conditions. And so those are the kind of main characters that you're going to meet in Of Mice and Men. So in the first chapter of the story, you're going to meet George and Lenny, and they are migrant workers who are traveling around to different farms looking for work. Okay, and very poor, very hungry, and they just are kind of struggling to make it in the world. And that is kind of the introduction to Of Mice and Men. That's what the world looks like. That's what the United States looks like in Of Mice and Men here. So if you look at the cover, this is going to be where we kind of set the stage. We have two men here, and they're sitting by a creek, and that's going to be the very first setting that we have in Of Mice and Men. So I hope you guys really enjoy this book. Again, just kind of keep all the things that I said in mind as you read chapter 1. Okay.